Oh boy, this is an interesting one. Today we're talking about the Avatar The Last Airbender episode, Jet. One that I don't revisit a lot. I don't like Jet's character very much. I know I'm in the minority in that regard, at least from what I've experienced of the fandom. A lot of people like Jet, some because he's cool, some because they're horny for cartoons, and some because he's a pretty nuanced villain. Or I guess I should say antagonist. Villain isn't really the right word for what Jet is. At the end of the day, I do believe that his heart is in the right place after all. And before I forget, the horny about cartoons thing, I wasn't being disparaging. It's just a fact. But I don't particularly like him. He doesn't really do a lot for me. So I went into this one purposefully being mindful of that and trying to really think about Jet as a character and what he brings to the show. In this episode, the characters meet Jet just after Sokka, trying to be mindful of the gang's best interests, accidentally leads them into, not really an ambush, but like the middle of a Fire Nation camp where they're basically like auto-surrounded. And it just so happens that this Fire Nation camp is one that was likewise surrounded by Jet and his people. So he's able to save them and makes a very strong first impression on Katara and Aang. Katara more so, because Katara, man, if we're talking about being horny for cartoons, Katara is horny for this cartoon, man. Again, not disparaging, just pointing it out. And I think it's kind of funny how hard they go at it. The wiki describes it as a crush. Man, that could have been what they were going for, but the scene where she blushes so hard and is kind of laid back in his arms felt like they were trying to imply a little bit more than that, to me at least. Like, I know she's a younger character, but like, you know, I still get the sense. I get the sense that that's what they were going for. Katara feels things for this kid, is my point. And that's why by the end of the episode, she feels so personally betrayed once she realizes the kind of person he is. And throughout the course of the episode, he seems pretty reasonable. Like, there's a moment where he and his group, with Sokka with them, ambush and attack and are seemingly willing to kill an old man just because he's Fire Nation. And then later, Jet justifies it by saying, look, he was an assassin. He had this dagger with him that has poison in the hilt. He was sent here to kill me. And in that moment, he could be telling the truth. But Sokka swears he didn't see a knife. And it turns out by the end of the episode, Jet was lying about the knife to justify his actions to these new people who aren't fully indoctrinated into his system yet. Because the main through line in this episode is that Sokka considers himself the leader of their group, since he's the most thoughtful and, let's not kid ourselves, the most intelligent of the bunch when it comes to like strategy and stuff. Like, Katara is not stupid. I would never say that. She's a smart character too, but she doesn't think about that kind of thing, whereas he does. And Aang admits outright he's just a goofy kid. He's not really concerned with leading anybody. At least not yet. He kind of steps up into that role more towards the end of the series, but he's not there yet. But Sokka is a more cautious leader, and yet at the same time one who speaks very openly about trusting his gut. Whereas Jet seems much more proactive, but also like he understands the situation around him better than Sokka tends to do. But that just comes with the territory. Jet is holed up in a fixed base, in a fixed location, and he polices a fixed area. Of course he's going to have a better understanding of how things work in this specific place than Sokka will as they're traveling around to different locations. And Sokka's plan at the beginning to try to shake Fire Nation patrols by staying on the ground rather than flying on their giant furry monster isn't a bad one. It's just he didn't think to have them still ride on Appa's back and the other two complain about it and get real mad at him. And in the end, Sokka's instincts end up saving a lot of lives because Jet, who seems happy to have Aang and Katara on board with his operation, even for a short period of time, seemingly because he appreciates their abilities and them as people, really just wants to use their ability as waterbenders to try to flood an Earth Nation town that is occupied by Fire Nation soldiers. And civilians too, it would seem, because the old man lives there and he's a civilian. And like, he says it's for the greater good, that he is sacrificing the lives of the Earth Kingdom people who live there to get rid of the Fire Nation. But Sokka points out, rightfully so, that who would he be saving it for? Everyone would be dead. It really does come across that Jet really just wants revenge for his tragic past, which is very similar to Katara and Sokka's, which is yet another reason why Katara feels such a connection with him, and why she feels so personally betrayed by his actions, because she's far too compassionate a person to ever do what he does. And his actions seem pretty stinking bad. Like, the episode doesn't mince words. He is considered in the wrong by the protagonists of this show, who are present. I mean, Zuko's not here, but you get my point. And from what I've seen, the fandom tends to agree. But I want to give Jet a fair shake, not just in terms of his character, but in terms of his actions. So let's actually dig into what he plans to do in this episode and discuss. Let's have the hard discussion as to whether or not he could possibly be justified. Jet's situation immediately brought to mind, for me, the situation of the Bajorans in Star Trek. We hear about their situation mostly in retrospect in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, a show which, at least for the most part, through most of its run, is about the aftermath of the Cardassian occupation of the Bajoran homeworld, Bajor. The Cardassians occupied the planet for 50 years. They took complete control of the government, they ravaged the planet, stole its resources, and brutalized the people. And I realize I am saying words like brutalize the people in a review of a cartoon, but this is Avatar we're talking about. I think you guys probably should have expected it, honestly. And in Star Trek, in the universe of Star Trek, the Bajoran people, since the Federation were too far up their own asses to do anything about the occupation, resorted to a resistance movement, which did sacrifice the lives of the Bajoran people who worked most closely with the Cardassians in order to drive the Cardassians away and save everyone else. And it feels like Jet is justifying his actions to himself and to his people by pretending that his situation is that he has no other option. And that's just not true. First of all, Jet and his operation are never going to free the entire Earth Kingdom. It's just not going to happen. They're a bunch of kids. They're not mobile. Like I already talked about how a big factor in his success is the fact that his operation's not mobile. Hence, he knows pretty much everything about the sphere in which he operates. He can really only do anything about this one area in this one little valley. And he already talked about it, he already bragged about it towards the start of the episode, how successful he and his people have been at making things better by limiting the resources that the Fire Nation soldiers in the area are able to take in, by cutting off their supply lines and harassing them at every opportunity. It's something he's good at, and it gets results. Eventually, he might have even been able to drive the Fire Nation out of the area by doing this. After all, if they haven't reinforced the area enough to stop him yet, they probably don't care about this area enough to do that. Also, bless you, Rupert. Also, while there is... Jeez, buddy. You done? You done, buddy? You okay? He looks like he's gonna sneeze again. No, we're good? We're good? Okay. While there is an inherent oppression that comes with being colonized, the people in this valley, there's no indication that any immediate harm is befalling them, that they're being, like, brutalized, for lack of a better term. Like, the old man we see, he's definitely Fire Nation, so maybe he's just better off than everybody else, but he seemed fine and able to freely move around. And when, at the end, Sokka warns the Fire Nation soldiers overseeing the town of Jet's plan to blow a reservoir and flood the entire area, they evacuate everyone, even the Earth Kingdom citizens under their control. Like, I'm not saying that what the Fire Nation is doing here is right, but it doesn't seem like these specific Fire Nation soldiers are the worst of the worst. And, like, the people there don't at least have lives to live. Lives that they could continue, conceivably, if things improve in the area. Lives that Jet's actions would be robbing them of. Jet's plan does take things too far. And while it's clear, let's go back to the Star Trek example for a minute. While it's clear, when we're looking back on this conflict in hindsight throughout the course of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, that there are elements of the Resistance that, in hindsight, some of the people involved realized might have taken things too far, that they might regret. Now, they really did not have a choice. Again, because the Federation wouldn't help them. They definitely could have, but they didn't. And that's the difference there. Jet does have another choice. He has that stuff I mentioned before about continuing the strategy that he's been employing up to this point. And he also has Aang. Like, we don't see them discuss it, but we know the gang talked to him about what they've been up to. It makes sense that they would have mentioned that they're trying to get Aang to the North Pole so that he can start to fix things. So right there, he knows the Avatar is in the process of trying to restore order, or however you would want to put it. But instead, he takes advantage, he manipulates the Avatar into killing a bunch of people, or at least almost killing a bunch of people. He is so caught up in his own vendetta that he doesn't see this other, better option staring him in the face, and exploits it instead. And I don't blame Jet for being left bitter by his circumstance. I don't. In a similar situation, Sokka or Katara could have ended up like him. I mentioned their backstory is very similar to his. But it's the fact that he is so close-minded about it, and he takes things too far, so too far, that makes him a bad guy. And it's super interesting because rewatching the episode, I got a specific vibe from him and his people. They have their secret base hidden away. They have their own, like, recurring villains and the soldiers and stuff. They each have their little quirks and gimmicks. They're all very unique in their designs. It kind of reminded me of something that you might see in a more standard Saturday morning style cartoon. Something with less nuance than Avatar, where the villains are all wholesale villainous and the heroes are all good guys, charismatic, likable good guys, where things are black and white, without the gray that this show is so good at giving us. Like, can't you imagine a version of Jet and his guys who have their own weekly show with Battle of the Week episodes where each week they foil the plans of the recurring soldier bad guys and leave them shaking their fists as they retreat, ready to scheme again? Like, I have no way of knowing if this was the intention of the writers when they were making this episode, but it felt like the writers on this show applying that same kind of situation to their own world and showing how it doesn't really work. And thinking of it that way and thinking more critically about Jet and his past and his motivations, I do end up liking the character better by the end. I don't really like him as a person. Obviously, not to say that he's a real person. You get what I'm saying. Like, he still comes off as kind of a giant dick. But at the very least, he's a giant dick that I enjoyed watching in this episode. More than I expected to. And I do know I like him better in some of his subsequent appearances, so I'm looking forward to that more than I otherwise would be. And man, he's a good fighter. The action scene involving him and Aang in this episode was really cool. I do like, though, that considering the bond that Katara felt with him, she's the one who ends up defeating him, really showing for the first time how dangerous she is as a waterbender, seemingly relying on her instincts, just like her brother is purportedly so good at doing, as she doesn't really seem to concern herself with her stance that much. She just does the thing, and it's glorious. Overall, this is a good episode. It left a better impression with me than I remember. I know a lot of fans remember this episode very fondly, and I definitely understand that more now, why that is. And, like, if you haven't seen the show before, or you haven't seen much of it, and you want to get a real quick and dirty idea of how it deals with ethics, like, this is definitely the episode to watch to do that. It's wrapped up into a nice, pretty package for you, all right here in 20 minutes. It's a good episode of the show that adequately sets up stuff that's going to be cooler than it later. And I had fun revisiting it. I don't know how often I'll revisit it again in the future, but I had fun revisiting it this time. All of that said, though, guys, if you have seen the Avatar The Last Airbender episode yet, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe. If you haven't, you can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as to the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.